Welcome to Volume 2 of On the Topic of Poetry. I had the pleasure of spending time with Lisa Starr, Rhode Island's Poet Laureate Emeritus, while on a trip to Rhode Island. And I didn't have my trusty professional filmmaker with me, so you can see that when I'm interviewing Lisa, who gave me her time generously, and the conversation is absolutely brilliant and magical, but the filming quality isn't as professional as I would have liked it to be, but I wasn't going to pass up on the opportunity since it's been a while since I've seen Lisa, and I took the advantage of spending time with her, and I think that you will thoroughly enjoy this interview with Lisa Starr. Thank you. So thank you, Lisa. Lisa Starr, Poet Emeritus of Rhode Island, the brainchild behind the Block Island Poetry Project, and also you're currently the director of the Mystic Cafe poetry series and have been for a few years. So we first met as part of Monday Poets. I met you through the Monday Poets group, which I'm here this weekend in Rhode Island for a weekend with a bunch of the ladies. And we were honored to have you join us for part of the weekend. And we know you also because we used to do our weekends at the Hygeia House for many years. And you just inserted yourself when you realized what we were doing, which is great. So there's so much that we can talk about. This is part of a series called On the Topic of Poetry. And when it comes to poetry, there's so many different worlds that you have your feet in, your heart in, your poetry advocacy in. You are a mover and shaker in the poetry world. And let's start with talking a little bit about how you came to be, this poet of note, and some of the extraordinary work you've done with the Block Island Poetry Project, being the Poet Laureate, and just inspiring other poets.
Well, I suppose, you're asking how it all started. It just started with a very natural love for and delight in poetry from a very young age. Like I was that, precocious kid that could memorize poems and delight all the aunts and uncles on a Saturday afternoon, when I was like 4 and 5 years old. So some part of me, and the way I think we all gravitate towards one thing that really is our passion, I guess I would say that's been the passion, the draw since I was very young. And it really kind of, what's interesting is the timing of this interview and your introduction, talking about so much of the work that I've done, because I'm at a cycle in my life where I don't have the huge amount of energy that I did for it for so many years. And in many ways, that's natural, in particular with the work at the Block Island Poetry Project, which ran for 14 years. I was not only directing the whole thing, but also running the building, the inn where it was housed. So there was so much to do. And at the end of it all, there were all the sheets to wash and the dishes to do for the next weekend. I don't feel like I would ever have the energy to do that again in my life. But I suppose to make a simpler answer, I've always been drawn to it. I've always loved it. The writing has always been natural to a fault, meaning I'm a poet that doesn't work in the way that poets should work. I don't create time for myself to write. I barely edit my poems. Shame isn't a good word, but I think it's time for me at this point to be adding a little more discipline to my own writing practice, because so much happens so fast. The writing for me has always been an extension of living. So that, the first published book came out when I was 23, and in the preparation for my marriage. Then I had 2 kids, and living with them, raising them, immediately the next book was written. And then the next book, well, we bought a derelict property. The writing has always been such an extension of how I live my life. And clearly, by the work that I've done, the sharing of it, and I don't mean my work as much as the sharing of poetry, because that's my medium. So that's what I know how to teach, or at least bear witness to, is a gift to many who are willing to accept it. So because I've sort of had a platform and a lot of successes early in my life, I was every teacher's pet. One of the members, board of directors on my board at the Arts Cafe Mystic is a former English teacher, who had my first poem published in the New London Day when I was 15. So I always had a lot of support, and that plants in you. So the extension of poetry and the creating of writing communities, I think, is probably my most significant contribution. At this point in my life, it's tapered a lot. There's no inn to run the series out of. Like I said, I don't think I'd have the energy for that now. But I miss it. And the further I am away from it, the further I am away from my friendship with poetry and its necessity in my life. Like right now, I kind of feel like I've said everything I can say. Who needs another one of my poems? But when I'm engaged in a community of writers, as I was this weekend with the Monday poets who visited Rhode Island, all of a sudden in the encouraging it, I relearned that lesson, how important it is to take those thoughts that I have and try to do something with them. Because as I encourage everyone in every workshop, there's nobody in the world that has your voice. So if that's what you think you need to write about, you need to write about it, because nobody else could do it.
So in our final session this morning, you shared a very new poem. And so the way that the weekend works is that we get together Thursday afternoon, we sort of settle in, we come together Friday morning, the rule is the poem has to be written that weekend. And the idea is that we walk away with 5 pieces that we will then work on. And you shared a new poem this morning that is so your voice, and it's like, first draft, and it's raw, and it's gorgeous, and it's heartbreaking, and I would love it if you shared it with us.
Oh gosh.
Are you open to doing that?
Sure.
Don't feel forced.
Sure. I mean, I just want to tell the viewer, I write about kids and dogs and birds and goofy things in libraries. It's a pretty heavy-duty poem, written very rawly. The poem will speak to it. But yeah, if I'm going to read that poem, we're gonna go to
a difficult place.
Yeah.
And if you'd rather read something else, that's fine.
No, and I think what brings it all back to the context of this interview is the Monday Poets. As the group morphs, many members of the core group, I don't know how much your viewers will know about the Monday Poets, but this group of women began gathering
30 years ago.
30 years ago. And first came to Block Island, I think in about 2000. I think you guys came and stayed at the inn for over the course of 15 years.
Yes.
Till I sold
Till
the
you
business.
sold it.
Yeah. So, I began when I greeted you guys last night by saying I haven't written a thing, and the voice is very, very, very far away. But that invitation to show up and to show up with something just made me begin going through some notes where I found a piece that was not written today, but it was, I forgot completely. And brought it as an experiment because of the support of a writing community that said, you bring something and let's hear it out. So that's my pitch, and there will be many of them for the importance. If you want to keep writing, who cares about the success, right? We write because we need to. So the importance of finding a community so that you keep writing and you have an audience that becomes a really good discerning audience for that own unique voice. Well, here's your visual. Even though I was told by the women in the writers group that I don't need the visual. On the adjacent page to this one is your meal order that I wrote down just last Thursday. I mean, not even a week ago. For dinner, you ordered iced tea, grilled cheese, buttered pasta, applesauce, chocolate ice cream, and you said, salt and pepper, lots, and kind of rolled your eyes to let me know how bland the hospital food was. All of it was interesting. Your deliberate perusal of your choices, your shocking appetite, and your knowledge of how bad the food was, considering you hadn't had solid food in about a week. You moved on to the breakfast order. Look, see, I've got it written down right here. Cheerios, milk, sugar, home fries, applesauce, hot water, tea, iced tea. Then we talked for a while, big things and small. You told me about that trombone player from Chicago that you loved for a while, and I told you about Coleman's paintings. You told me you were spending too much money, but you'd splurged anyway on matching Christmas pajamas for you and your girls. And even though they were too expensive, I said I'm glad you did, and you said me too. And then you looked at me, and the smile turned to tears because we were both thinking about how far away in days Christmas seemed. And then the tears flowed into words. I'm really sad, you said. And I said again, me too. And then you said, it's not fair, is it? And I said, no, Kate, it's horribly unfair. And you said with as much anger and certainty as you could muster, yeah, that's what I think. I loved that moment then, and I love it even more now, less than a week later. You voicing your anger, feeling your own grief, a momentary what the fuck before the food came to bring us back to now. In the now, you started with the applesauce, just one spoonful. You said it didn't taste right and called for a bag because you thought you were going to get sick. The bag came, the moment passed, and you took a Stuart Little-sized bite from your grilled cheese sandwich and worked to hold it down. And after a lengthy break, moved on to the ice cream, slowly, the 4 spoonfuls, all by yourself. And oh, that was some feast. That 1 spoon of applesauce, that nibble, the ice cream. Until 10 minutes later, when it exploded out of you, a lava force of ice cream and grilled cheese and cancer and fury. You threw up so much more than you'd eaten. But it needed to go, all that poison trapped in your small body. Enough of this food nonsense. No one needs to know about this part of it, and yet they do. And what's more, they want to. They want to know how it was because they love you. So that's how it was last Thursday night. And here it is now. Here's how it is this Thursday morning, less than 2 hours since you flew.
Thank you. So part of being a poet is writing about the tough things, right? that often people just don't talk about, let alone write about.
Well, no one knows that better than you.
Well, I think we all have, a darkness that
Yeah.
where we've been and
Yeah.
come back from.
Again, that really speaks to the outreach, which is such an important part of my life. As the poet laureate in Rhode Island, the legislature is so vague. It basically gives you 5 years, a tiny stipend, and the responsibility and the privilege of being an advocate for poetry in any way that you can. So in Rhode Island's laureate history, I think we have 7. Everyone's done it differently. Somebody wrote a column once a month, Tom Chandler, for the Providence Journal, where he explored a local poet. So that was terrific. People finally had a local source, Rhode Island writers, to send their poems to. And he would publish it and write a little bit about it. For me, reaching out to marginalized communities was really, really, really important. My big draw was the elderly. Having recently lost my mom and my father and several significant elders in my life. So it started in, assisted living facilities, but eventually we branched out to homeless communities, had a program for 11 years at the medium security prison in Rhode Island, shelters for battered women, wards for teenagers at risk to themselves. And, what you just said, that the job of the poet is to write about those things that are difficult. The other thing that comes with it, as we understand, but many people don't, is that those stories that are most difficult to tell are usually the most necessary. So
Well
when
said.
I think about giving voice to people who have really been battered, and a big part of it is a challenge to the self, to create a space that's safe enough for people to go to that place, to get that thing out of their body that they've needed to say for 25 years, but nobody gave them permission. You have to be sure that you're ready for it. I remember a really keen moment in the ACI where a guy that we loved, he was in there for second-degree manslaughter. After months of it encouraging them that this was a safe place, he came in and his hands were like shaking. And he wrote about the evening that he killed his best friend in a jealous rage. And, he came in and said to me, because they all liked me so much, I was like their mom. He said, I don't know, into my team. I always had a team with me. I don't know if you guys want to hear this. And we were all sure that we could and that it would stay safe. And he wrote about that experience. And he was in wonder because, when we don't share these things, what's that Langston Hughes poem about the dream deferred, But the necessity of creating a space for those stories to get told, and also as a writer, say with something they really need to share, to find a safe space, a small community. It could be a community of one listener where you can say that thing that you never dared to say. I think when we do that, some of the darkness, gets taken away.
Absolutely.
From it. I have a poem in my second book. It's called Other People's Poems. And it's written about our father died when we were fairly young. And that's when poetry to me really became necessity. It went from being delightful to entertaining aunts and uncles to writing school plays and being the teacher's pet, to really trying to figure out what was happening in my household because my mother didn't communicate. So my dad, the master communicator, is dying slowly. My older brother and sister understand it. Nobody's telling me, and I keep thinking he's going to get better. But there's evidence that he's not going to get better. Like the day they wheeled an oxygen tank into the house, and nobody says, oh, there's going to be a nurse coming in with an, nobody's talking about it. So writing for me at that time became a way of discovering truths that I forgot. So going back, I've been writing about my father's death since I endured the process. But there was an evening with my brother, probably 15 years after my dad died, where my brother finally told me about an experience he'd had with my father. He had to, my mother asked him, because there wasn't a nurse available, to bathe my father. And my parents we weren't one of those households. I don't think many families were in the 70s, but we didn't really talk about body parts or anything like that. So none of us had ever we'd seen our father in a bathing suit. At any rate, long story short, my mom asked my brother to bathe my father, and my brother did it, but he did it like an angry 15-year-old kid. And he, he knows he slammed around a bit. He knew that my father was really embarrassed for my brother that he had to do it, and also embarrassed as a father that he was so far beyond bathing himself. But going back to that idea of what happens if we don't share our stories, my brother's not a writer of poems. So this poem that's called Other People's Poems starts out, perhaps I should leave other people's poems to other people, but left alone, they grow, they thicken, they accumulate. The poems of others, this one, my brother's, he was 13. And then it goes on from there. And, my brother didn't write that poem, though surely I shared it with him and asked his permission to publish it. But again, the gift of relieving yourself from something. And here's something I want to add that just popped into my head. Sometimes, and it is the Writers Circle group, Susanna Wood in particular, who you spent the weekend with, but several other members of that group. In particular, when my kids were young and my life was filled with so much joy, the poems were generally triumphant. And what I've learned is sometimes you have to apologize more for your joy and your triumph than you do for your grief. And so I remember it was members of our group who said to me, not many people write about joy in the way that you do. So use it. And so again, back to that notion of what we're afraid to say. It's generally everything. And really, it's because it can have that feeling of like, oh, here's my story and here's my poem. Isn't it terrific? When really what it is an invitation into a dance. And, you don't push it in the wrong circles. You know exactly when you say, hey, you guys want to hear a poem? That you're not going to read the poem, That happened to me on March 17th. As you know, I'm working as a caregiver for the elderly. And I was with a client who's elderly, who's quite a reader and quite a scholar. They're not all that into poetry, but it was St. Patrick's Day, and the poem, The Song of the Wandering Angus by Yeats, came into my head. And it's a poem I memorized as a kid. And I felt like I'll just give Anne and Chris this dose of really good Irish poetry on St. Patrick's Day, and won't they love it? So I went into their den and said, hey, how about a poem before I go? And they both kind of glanced up like, okay, because they knew how much it meant to me. So anyway, don't push it in the wrong circles.
So talk a little bit about the creation of the Block Island Poetry Project. I was at the first one, and I attended quite a few others after that, and had the pleasure to be with a lot of really extraordinary poets: Lee Young Lee, Billy Collins, Mary Oliver, Marie Howe, and the list just goes on and on. Mark Doty, it was always such a intimate space. It wasn't, I mean, I've been to Dodge Poetry Festival many times, and that was always extraordinary. But the Block Island Poetry Project was so much more intimate. And so, you just felt so much more connected, I thought, to the poets.
So, first of all, you've been very humble because you said that you were at the first one, but you didn't mention that you and our dear friend Elizabeth Thomas were also the first two teachers of poetry.
No, I didn't.
I hired because you taught me so much.
That's sweet of you.
So it's not only sweet, it's true. When I decided to do this, I already had all the supplies. You could say a toolbox. You could say, what does a painter have? How about a fishing box? What those guys down on the beach have? I had everything I needed because of all the things that sort of fell into place. I mean, I never meant to be an innkeeper, but I fell in love with a derelict property that Block Island almost tore down. And that's when I decided we got to buy this place and we'll turn it into an inn, and that's how it will pay for itself. So that happened. And then as a writer, I'd been in school, I don't know. I think there just reached a point where I suddenly wasn't really exposed to poetry at all and began attending writing workshops. I hadn't really done anything like that. So I would go to the ones that writers recommended. Don't forget the Connecticut poets, the Monday poets, came to the inn shortly after we opened. So you were all part of introducing me to a poetry world that's very, very accessible, but it was so far away from my realm of thinking. One of you handed me a Poets and Writers magazine, and that changed everything. Like, oh, you can go there. Many of them for me in Rhode Island, just always a ferry ride, but a drive away. So I got exposed to it and went when I could, maybe once a year, take a splurge and do a writing weekend somewhere. And at a place that I won't mention, a sort of healing center in the New England area, they had a really terrific writing, a weekly, once a year, they did a poetry week. And I went to it 3 years in a row, slid over all the favors from my ex-husband because I'm leaving him at home with 2 little kids to go read and write poems for 5 days. And I went to it the first year and I couldn't believe what I learned. And I went the second year and the poets were just as good, if not better, but the organization of it was sort of failing. Like, as an observer who'd worked hard to have this time away, you facilitated many workshops. Often the biggest challenge is making sure that anybody who wants to be heard gets heard. And it's just laws of averages that you might have 1 or 2 voices that can monopolize that. And so I was kind of watching that happen. And when I went back the third year, I just felt like, who is running this? They could, nobody interrupted that woman who for the 4th time in 3 days read us that poem. Like, the whole thing was wrong. And I remember driving home from where I was to Narragansett, Rhode Island, which is where I had to catch a ferry to get home. And kind of thinking about all the things I would do differently if I had been running it. And had this fantasy of maybe they need a director. And then I was like, but, I'm thinking about how I have to rush to catch a ferry. It occurs to me, I knew this, but I lived in a very, very desirable location. And my home was also a 10-room inn. So it just happened very, very, very Germanically. I called the poet who had been sort of the master poet for 3 years at the Omega Institute. His name is Richard Tillinghast. He'd become a really, really, really good friend. But I just started doing numbers. I'd hit a stoplight and I'd write down what I thought the rooms might generate and what I thought a poet like Richard Tillinghast might cost. And then had all these things and got home and sent Richard Tillinghast an email and knew I wanted to do it in April, which is National Poetry Month. And that's how it started, you know? Interesting, you know, sometimes we wonder why we do things. For years, I had a job working for a friend who ran a timeshare resort on Block Island. And she was actually the mother of a friend, and I'd been hired really because she had a lot of financial struggles and legal battles, and she had this whole folder of letters that she needed to write to like the planning board and I at the time was being paid to write papers for her daughter who was going to Providence College. So I'd get paid $50 to help this young woman get B pluses and A minuses on her papers at Providence College. Never an A, that would have given us away. But I had this job like for 2 years, just helping this woman out, writing these letters. But at the same time, they always needed help. So I'm working at a timeshare resort, and I know what it's like on Saturdays when all the laundry in every place needs to be turned. So when I decide we're going to buy a derelict property, I know some things. You know, when the bank said, what do you even know about running an inn? I said, I know we need three sets of laundry for each room, because you need one, you need another, and then you need a backup because someone's going to spill or somebody. And so all those 2 years of sort of idle time felt important so I could answer those questions. And the years of running an inn, there weren't that many. The poetry project, well, I think it started about 5 years after we bought and renovated and opened the inn. But all that sort of labor of running an inn and making continental breakfast and answering questions on the phone, when the opportunity came up to do the writing series, it was like, oh, that's why I did all of that. So this could happen because that series really wanted to happen. And as you mentioned, the goal was for an intimacy. Because one of the things that I've never liked, and it was my great privilege to be paying the people who were coming at the Block Island Poetry Project. To me, poetry is an equalizer. And in any field, of course, there's people who are successful. Like when I was a point guard at Ledyard High School and really actually fancied I could play for UConn, like these women come from generations of basketball, you know. The hierarchy of course, there's Paige who's playing for UConn and there's me if we're basketball players. I felt like that was happening in the poetry world, palpably, right in front of me. You know, the big poet up on the stage with the spotlight and 150 people who have paid a lot of money just hoping that they might get to ask the man or the woman on the mountain a question, and then taking that answer as if that's the law. And to me, that always bothered me. As a student going to UConn, I had huge support through my high school writing teachers were my hugest supporters as I was writing through my father's death. When I went to school, that kind of changed and grades were assigned to poems. And to me, that never made sense. So to be at a workshop, it's necessary, right? And the more we learn the craft, the more we can learn to teach people what might make a poem better, like shifting from a passive to an active voice, from a first to a second person. But to me, what's so important about in the work that I do is giving people voice. So that was really, really important to me when I started the Block Island Poetry Project, that it did operate out of my home. And there was breakfast in the morning and there were communal meals. And at the end of the day, you might be hanging out with Taha Muhammad Ali or Robert Bly. And that all happened very organically and was huge, not just for the participants, but also for the poets. So, who never got that chance. These guys, many of them, when I was hiring them, so Coleman Barks, as you know, has been my soulmate and really best friend since I met him in 2007. Robert Bly was his mentor and teacher. You see all these talks that they're doing all over YouTube. It seems like they're together all the time, but really maybe every 2 years, given their busy schedules. And I remember hearing them both speak at a conference called the Great Mother Conference and thinking about how great it would be if they could come hang out at my inn and really have some time to talk together. And that's how the invitation was extended. And that's exactly how it happened. You know, Coleman hanging out in the kitchen, helping me make coffee and cookies, and just being able to be Coleman Barks. And instead of the world-renowned Rumi teacher. So yeah, something very organic happened there. And I sure hope it's happening elsewhere. And that was all blessing, and also, of course, a lot of hard work. You know,
A lot of hard work.
to have the facility there. You
Right.
know?
Well, I know from my own experience to be sitting in a room where literally right across the room for me, sitting in an intimate setting is Leon Lee, you know, or, you know, like Mark Doty. How many times was Mark Doty there? And it was just always such a gift. And Mary Oliver, and Billy Collins, and
Yep.
just.
And they all knew I had their back, you know,
was
and so did the people attending. You know, like people knew that when Mary Oliver came to breakfast, don't do it. Don't tell her how much you love her. She already knows. What she's loving is being able to go down into my breakfast room and eavesdrop on all you people, as she calls you, and be a real human being having a cup of coffee, overhearing people. It was really cool with Frank McCourt too. He came out, he didn't come to the poetry project, but he came out to do a reading at the Island Bound, which is the Block Island bookstore, several times, but he's always stayed with me. And he got so comfortable because people wouldn't bother him, or out of context, he just wasn't recognized. So I remember one morning he was at breakfast, he was reading the Block Island Times with all the big news from this island community of 800 people, listening to everybody in the dining room talk about his reading that afternoon. And it was so cool for him because people were talking about their favorite passages. He came out after Angela's Ashes and then again after Tis. But for him to be able to just be among people sharing their joy of having the opportunity to be in a church listening to Frank McCourt read is real different from that awkward, you know, spot signing books where,
Right.
I mean, you love them all. I've signed a lot of books, but it's never as genuine as if you'd had a one-on-one or met him while you were sitting in rocking chairs. So yeah, that was cool.
God,
that was really cool. And necessary. That's what I mean. That whole, I was Rhode Island Poet Laureate for 6 years. I had to go yesterday to introduce Rhode Island's new Poet Laureate at an event and was rushing in a little bit late and just chatting with the people I was walking in with and asked their names. The guy said, "Are you going to get some signatures?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, we're about 2 minutes late. And I said, "What?" I got their names, and she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Lisa." And they said, "Lisa what?" And I said, "Lisa Starr." And they were like, "Oh my God, you're the Lisa Starr. You're famous." And I was like, "Famous? I'm running in late like both of you." And it was so, but people can get so intimidated by that.
Right.
And it's really, really important, I think, for those who have success to remember a huge part of it is work and talent. But, if you're given a gift, like the generosity of being given a platform to be an advocate for poetry, that should be a humbling experience rather than something that fuels your ego.
What a great way to wind up the conversation. I could talk to you all day. And
I'm squirming. I'm in front of this. In case you guys don't know, propane fires really throw heat. I'm always sitting over there. That's great.
did you want to end on a poem, maybe?
Oh, sure. Sure. I'll end with two poems.
Okay.
And then if you edit, you can choose one of
No,
them.
no.
One is a very short poem about April, and it is April 5th today, and it's National Poetry Month. As probably most people watching your video blog will know. But here's an April poem. My kids are now 27 and 28 and off in the world. This poem was written in an April when they were like 4 and 5 and we were racing off to school. And I am, excuse me, just gonna let my cat out. Okay, so a short April poem called Prayer in April. The kids were like 4 and 5. Prayer in April. Just this morning, right as we clambered off to school, in the driveway the bird, that startled baby bird. He was so frightened he'd lost his voice. His little feathered head became more yellow with his quivering. We three took turns holding him. The complicity of our awe is what strikes me now, and I hope I'll always remember it. How we dropped to our knees, how we took turns cradling him, how for a moment, when he flew, we lost our voices too.
Absolutely lovely.
I think one of the, just one more note on poetry, I think, especially when I look back at these huge amounts of poems that I wrote about my kids, I think for me, the poetry is an effort to hold on to the things that I love the most, even if those things or people aren't here anymore. So that notion of remembering, and the line is in the poem, I hope I'll always remember it. I don't think I would remember that moment if I hadn't immediately written the poem down after I dropped the kids off at school. Mm-hmm. And for them, now old enough to not be embarrassed by the poems I've written about them, to be so grateful for these memories that come back to them.
Nice.
So that's one of them. And here's a different one, and I'm choosing it because yesterday when I got to the Jamestown Library, 5 minutes late, Colin Channer, I knew was going to be even more late than me because he texted me. So I knew I was okay. But the poor woman running the event was in such a panic that she was about to start reading one of my poems when I walked in. And I had heard her say as I was walking down the hallway, she was like, well, you're all here, so even if they don't show, it's all gonna be okay. I bet some of you brought poems. Let me just start with one of Lisa's. And it was the one poem that I was thinking I was gonna read. So at any rate, here's what it is. I'm coming out of a time of not really writing and of my voice, maybe as it evolves, being very far away. And it's not easy, for as much as who I am as a poet and what I've accomplished, as I don't associate ego with that, but I associate my life feeling complete with that. So when the writing's gone, there's a huge part of me that's missing. And I feel like I'm just watching life because I'm not doing what I'm meant to do, which is write it down. And this poem came after about a 3-year period of that. So driving to this thing yesterday, where I wasn't really feeling like I had much to say to anybody, I was leaning in my head on one of my own poems to remind me. The way we go back to poems of Mary Oliver's, like The Journey, or Wild Geese, or one of the Rumi translations over and over again.
Right.
They remind us, okay. So this poem is called What It Takes. All it takes is one blue rowboat tied to a buoy and its reflection in this moment for me to go remembering everything. Then a murmur, the sound of water lapping, the breeze snapping in the way the leaves resist the letting go or don't. The wheels of a bicycle soaring downhill with some gravity-glad rider. All of it, complicit. What I'm talking about is the sheer shimmering faith of the rope that connects the boat to the buoy, and the hands that tied the knot, and the fathers who teach their sons and daughters these simple things I see all day, and sometimes not at all. Moments like this become miracle, oracle. And I know again in the deepest place of my heart that the whole world, this one, is just my own face in the mirror. And I know that I am the boat and the buoy and the rope. And like Faith, that holy smoke, I am brilliant and bobbing and blue.
It's gorgeous. Lisa, thank you so much.
Pretty cool I wasn't even thinking about that. That word faith is so important in my life and in this poem, but to be looking at my friend Faith while I read it,
Thank you.
really kind of makes me feel like that was written for that.
Thank you.